only transferable skill that I can imagine to share here is the way how you implement projects and technology is kind of the same way how you would do a 4-course meal for 20. You got to start and end on a certain frequency. You got to deploy, so your deployment sheet got to be started in sprint 1, not at the end,
That is Svatka Simpson, VP of Architecture over at Appirio. I'm Josh Burke, a developer evangelist at Salesforce, and here on the Salesforce Developer Podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. There, Svatka is describing her first career at the age of 21 in culinary arts to her second career in computer science. And today we're going to sit down with Svatka and talk about that career and various pieces of advice that she has on architecture. Her career, by the way, begins with something very near and dear to my heart, video games.
And I mean, typing was probably the closest you could see. I remember as a kid, I was probably 6 or 7. My dad brought home this box and it had like a tape. And he would drop it in for the weekend and he says, go and play computer games. And so I grew up in Europe on the other side of the wall. Czech Republic was kind of closed off. So yes, my 80s were probably what you guys see in 70s.
What were some of those early video games?
You know what? I would say it was one of those where the little circles coming and eating the other big circles. Pac-Man.
Perfect. Okay, so you get into JavaScript and the good old AS400. How did you get introduced to Salesforce?
And it might have been probably around the same time that I was going to my trade school that my husband was working with a local company in Philadelphia called Starsight. And so the Salesforce then was very simple. It was even when we were talking about Lightning being like the new refresh UX UI.
Right.
2001 was one version before that.
What was life like before the bulk API?
So now we're going to fast forward to about 2009. I was working with a customer down in Washington, D.C., and they were looking to migrate from many systems into Salesforce. They had 22 objects, roughly about 11 million rows. Didn't really, it didn't feel like a lot. And we really weren't worried about the whole LDV, like a large data volume, in terms of bringing them to the platform. But what was not working for us was how much faster can we get the data in Salesforce. And so imagine that you map your 22 objects, you sort of prescribe your order of operations. So you're going to pick your users and you're going to pick probably their roles and profiles first before you bring leads and then accounts, contacts, and so forth, right? And after you have the sort of primary objects, if you will, you can go in a parallel loads. Now, again, this is pre-bulk API, and this is no parallel processing, right? So you have to have a certain order of operation before you can bring more of your friends to come and help you to load all of this data, right? And so we were trying to figure out if there is a certain pattern to the way how Salesforce accepts data through the data loader, because that's all we had.
Right.
And we were really finding out that there was only like a 270K rows we can bring in to Salesforce, whether it's middle of the day or midnight. It just didn't matter.
And so how long did it take to load the data?
It took us about 36 hours on a good day. It's 3 people. I mean, like today, like 11 years later, you look at this and you're like, wow, if only could I have used like my friendly DBM, right? Or I actually seen a couple of my friends at different places use like Node.js to script it, right? And they just hit a button and they bring 16 objects in like under hour and a half. Because they can.
Because they can, exactly. Yes. Well, and kind of more to that point, with your years of experience on the platform, do you have guidance on that kind of thing? Because I always kind of told my development teams, whatever you were doing last month might be wrong by now. Like we do there's 3 releases a year. Maybe don't assume that the solution you had before is the right one today.
And you know what? There is so much that one can learn just from the community and being able to work with colleagues and ways how they solve solutions. There is definitely a way to come up with repeatable process for data and for data migrations. So the company I work for, Appirio, we have a process where we can actually bring in the script alongside with mapping. So as you start doing your mapping, you actually have the script being developed and it's being actually put in VC. So VC is not, like a version control is not just for your code, for your metadata.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you could put your script somewhere so that in case you go on vacation, someone else can pick it up and run with it, right? In the old days, people would log into a server that had the SQL Server, whatever database we were using, and we were all working in that space. But in a future state, today you can't use very many different tools. I mean, can you use tools like DBM to just cut out the middleman and just not export and not use tools like Data Loader? That's one way of doing that, right? Do we still want people to use Data Loader when they can because it's a quick and snappy? Sure. But again, remember, it's not repeatable. It's something that doesn't really scale at bigger clients. And then, of course, with Scratchworks, there is definitely ways to bring data in and out differently, right?
Okay, so you've been at Appirio for many, many years. What have been some of your favorite projects?
Oh, favorite projects. Yeah, so many, but thank you for asking. 10 years in one company is something, but I got to tell you, it's not just the project, but it's the people that you meet along the way. I was so fortunate to learn from so many great architects along the way. It is just unbelievable. So I would say that one of the use cases that I can give you real quick is my user story in terms of getting to know Salesforce from when they went public at the exchange and then implementing Salesforce at the exchange like a number of years later.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
But now we have number of really great clients. We pulled together an implementation at Georgetown University a couple of years ago, and that one was probably very close and near and dear to my heart because Georgetown was really, really interested in understanding what does it mean to actually feel as a student entering the school, being part of the school and experiencing the user experience, the way how you interact with faculty and about your organization, as well as, what does it mean becoming an alum and then sending your kids back through the same process, right? And so we were instrumental in helping Georgetown to bring all together in the forefront 3 communities. It was for customer, faculty, as well as alumni.
That's an interesting twist on the customer 360 story where that's a nice long life cycle to a user like that. Was there any key technology that helped you do that?
Well, believe it or not, we actually implemented MuleSoft before MuleSoft was part of a Salesforce family.
Gotcha.
But you know what? So Linda Buckley from Georgetown, she was my counterpart in trying to figure out what is this landscape going to look like for Georgetown. And Georgetown has many of universities, like many colleges, many schools, if you will. And so are you going to have a multi-org landscape or are you going to go with single? And so we decided that a single landscape was a lot more instrumental for them at that point in time because you could have one faculty member going and being part of many schools or one student visiting many schools. And so how would you really fragment that user experience based on the number of instances you have in a backend, right?
Right. Yes. I've always found that the fewer things that people have to log into, the more likely they are to actually adopt it.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Is there any one project that sticks out for you that was, I don't want to say particularly difficult, but maybe particularly complicated?
Well, I'll tell you this one. Okay, so it was a number of years. I was very early into Salesforce when I was presented with LDV symptoms, large data volume symptoms in an instance, and I really wasn't seeing it. And as you stay in a platform for in my case, about 18, 19 years, I've seen it. At the beginning of my early career, I just didn't believe it. I didn't think that Salesforce had any flaws. There is no way. There's no possible way that you put a couple million rows on a platform and you're going to see like a spinning report or something like that, right? That had to be code. It couldn't be the platform itself. But as you become to mature, in a space of understanding the experience, and you understand that your standard objects have a joint in the backend for the custom fields, you can start seeing where LDVs could become really, really a fundamental flaw in your design, whether that's an object model design or the way how you interact with the data and just how you combat it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I have a friend who used to work on the team that helped large enterprises work through performance issues. And he always had key tips like, making sure you know what your foreign keys are and things like that. Is there anything specific that you want to give a shout out to that might help people avoid that?
I would say there is about 3 or 4 things that come to my mind. And one of which is just ensure the data really needs to be in Salesforce because it's doing something in terms of, giving any actionable outcomes that you plan to use in the
Hmm.
platform, right?
Hmm.
And so we see quite a lot of our customers bringing in data just because instead of using the right approach to maybe peeking into that different data store and just looking at it, or
Hmm.
using like Einstein analytics to say, hey, I'm going to bring you the reports. The data doesn't have to live in Salesforce. It could be attached through other mechanisms to the platform. And so I've only seen maybe once or twice where skinny tables were used in order to help with the reporting. But hey, we have Einstein analytics now. So I think that's in
Right.
the past. And as far as divisions, I really haven't seen any of my clients use divisions. How many of
Yeah.
your clients have you seen actually utilize the concept of divisions?
I don't have any touch points with it. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
I mean it was an
Yeah.
interesting concept, but then again, you're trying to do 360. Why would you divide?
Right. Right. Unless you absolutely
Yeah,
had to.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the transition that you went through very early in your career. You're something like a full stack developer, like you said. You had JavaScript, HTML. You'd worked on ASP and .NET, and then you added Salesforce into it. But you've gone from that kind of role to vice president of architecture. How what was that transition like from going from a developer to an architect?
I would say that I had quite a good number of allies along the ways
Mm,
that were
okay.
able to give me opportunities to get to learn a little more about the business than just the code. When I
Hmm.
started at Appirio, I was a developer, right? I started at
Hmm.
any rank that everybody would start. And even though I was an architect in my previous firm, I was very fortunate to start as a developer because I got to have an architect on every one of my deals and I got to learn from them. So that actually was really, really helpful to me. So as I was progressing, becoming, being a developer and doing either the configuration, hand coding, or doing some data architecture along the way,
Hmm.
I actually got to meet Alex Sutherland on one of my deals, and he got to give me a crash course on Ant. And here we go again to black and green screen, man. The command line. Oh my goodness. So I'm finally in this cloud space, right? I'm enjoying the cloud. There is nothing hard about it. It's point and click. You write a little bit of a code. Test classes still suck. We know that, but then you got to use those. And then we go back to the command line. And I'm like, what?
And not just the command line and Java
Uh-huh.
builds and config files and yeah, that whole
Yeah, but hang on.
nice.
The end is not that hard. I mean, installing and it can be,
No.
that's like forever. Like once you actually get it on your machine, right? That's like
Right.
you pass the high course. So you graduate high school once you actually get that done. But then you just got 3 files, your property file, your package.xml, and your build is super
Yep.
simple, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like Ant was a good slippery slope into things like Jenkins and
Mm-hmm.
Cumulus CI and the next level of tools that you really kind of should be adopting for that life cycle process that you're going to have. Cool.
So
So
along the way,
yep.
right? So
Yeah.
as I'm
Yeah.
developing through all my projects, I was able to start working with teams. And once you start working with the teams, you get to explore, the pre-sale side of the house, and you get to understand
Hmm.
how the business really operates. And so,
Yeah.
so really, there is a journey from being a developer to doing architecture to understanding enterprise landscape and truly like how do you scale large systems. Or I even had an opportunity to work with a healthcare life sciences out of New Jersey that has like 8 instances globally. Yet they have number of business units that operate the same way across the whole globe. But they decided to build every one of their geolocations in a different way. And so being
Hmm.
able to actually do a compare contrast on such a diverse landscape of the way how that company decided to build their Salesforce product in a sense, right? In so many different
Hmm.
ways. One of the instances had 3,000 lines of code and the other one ran out of every single limit out there, right? It is
Yeah.
quite fascinating to see that these 8 business lines in that one small location was able to go all declarative while, North America had to go all code, but that's just the way we are, we love to innovate.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some more of those allies that you've had along the way. Who are some people who have influenced you over your career?
So if I was to look at the influencers that have shaped the way how I look at the business and the way how to inspire me personally as well as others around me, I would look at people that I have met over the years. And I think I'm going to start with some of the women influencers, if I may.
Absolutely.
So in 2017, I was able to go to Grace Hopper conference down in Florida, which is an actual STEM conference. It's designed to bring more women in tech from the junior ranks from the colleges, get them interested in the companies that are high tech and that are cool. We are not just, geeky human beings. We are actually pretty awesome. And so one of the presenters was Dr. Fei Li, and she actually heads up the Stanford Institute for the Human-Centered AI. And what that really means in a way that the closest I can translate this to business speak, if you will, is that if you were to look at an image and a picture and you were to say, hey, computer, go and tell me what you're seeing, right? It needs to have some sort of database structure somewhere. Somewhere we have to say, hey, this picture really represents this word, right? And so Dr. Fei Li, she came up with this ImageNet concept. And so she crowdsourced the work of, many people across the globe to say, go and help me categorize these pictures to words so that I can go then in return go and actually work and enhance the machine learning, which is believed to be the turning point to AI. And so that people like Dr. Fei Li just gets me so excited about seeing, hey, what are the other possibilities we can do in image recognition today, right? You guys, Salesforce has an Einstein vision, and I can only imagine the kind of applications we can build just understanding that we can train those models to recognize certain images, to create some processes, to create a better customer experiences in our products.
It sounded like that was kind of an eye-opening event as to some of the possibilities for technology.
It sure is. If you come from the middle of Czech Republic, behind the wall, and you're kind of like presented to, hey, this is what you see, to a place like, America. And you see someone like Dr. Fei Li. She also immigrated from China to the United States, and where she took her imagination, it's very eye-opening.
And how about people from the ecosystem? We have rad women. We have a strong women in tech presence with the Salesforce community. What's been your involvement with that?
I have a number of really amazing women MVPs that are a part of the ecosystem. So let me start with Charlie Prinsloo. She is 16 certs. She's got 16 certs. She's also a candidate to CPA, and I met her at one of Suzanne's sessions a number of years ago when we were doing some previews to how do we get prepped for the coveted Salesforce Technical Architect certification. So she's really awesome. Gina Marquez, she's also an MVP. She actually co-runs an admin user group up here in Princeton in New Jersey, and she also helped me co-run the Dreaming event here in Philadelphia area called Phillyforce last year. So she's pretty awesome.
Nice.
And Susanna St. Germain, 19 certs. I don't know, man, how someone gets 19 certs, okay? And she is everywhere. She is, last time I checked, she was in Australia, She's always somewhere, which is awesome. She always gives back.
Well, yeah, and with 19 certs, maybe she doesn't sleep.
Right? Isn't that the truth? I mean, my goodness. But she was able to come to Phillyforce last year and actually put together a really great architecture session for us. So really appreciate all of the work that each and every one of these women, gave back to the community.
Okay. Instead of a hobby, I want to highlight a passion of yours, data privacy. Tell me why that's important to you.
Data privacy is really important to me because I believe that our kids, as they grow up, will need to be able to own their own digital footprint. When I look at data privacy from an architectural standpoint, I always look at data as the heart of any application. And so you can always make a pretty UI, but if it doesn't have the right data points, it's really pointless.
Right. That it's just a pretty UI.
Just a pretty UI, although there's tons of really good pretty UIs out there. So
Right.
looking from like an architect point of view, integration patterns are really important to us because they help us either decide whether we're going to have a single source of truth or we're going to duplicate the data across. And when you choose to duplicate the data across, you choose to subject them to possible data breach. And so just from that standpoint, if you duplicate it, you now lose the control over who sees the data, right? And so integration pattern like external objects and Salesforce Connect are so much more interesting to me when I don't need to really do anything with the data besides just looking at it and exposing it in Salesforce. And so for that reason, I think that every architect has, to look at the way how they design the application landscapes. And I know it's an enterprise landscape, not just Salesforce. I get that, but really keep that in mind. There are privacy laws that are across the globe, like the GDPR and the California Protection Law, that's already trying to say, listen, as a consumer, if I choose to be forgotten, you guys have to have a way to make that implement. You have to make sure that across all of your system, my record is no longer tagged with my name, right? We are seeing companies trying to implement those laws in EMEA, and they struggle with the concept of how far do they go? Where do they replicate all these records to? And are they truly compliant with that?
Right. And I think I've got two follow-ups on that. I mean, first of all, I guess just, how do you see the importance of that as kind of like as a human right, that my identity is my identity, whether it's my, physical biometrics or my digital footprint?
So that's a really great question. There is this company that is actually looking into it from a medical data side of the house. They're called Humaniko, and they're working with the UN. They're really lobbying with the UN, trying to put in a 31st human right to say, if me as a persona, I have generated some data points, I own the data. You can't just take my data and go and anonymize it and sell it and make profit on it. I should be able to go and receive some of those profits alongside with you if I choose to, which goes along with, hey, that's my data that you're using without my knowledge and actually, making money on.
Interesting. That goes back. One of our earliest episodes was on blockchain and part of the concept, not necessarily specifically to blockchain as a technology, but simply the user/consumer as a participant, not just a data point.
That's right.
And what kind of warning would you give to companies who, maybe they're not under GDPR, they don't have the California law, they don't have a legal restriction to start taking this seriously, but how much technical debt could they be getting into by not looking at this?
I agree with you because we are seeing these landscape diagrams coming across, and all we see is just spreadsheets and spreadsheets. And anytime you have yet another spreadsheet data point that's sitting somewhere on a SFTP server, you're exposing the data to really any harm. And so me as a consumer, I think I look at all the companies I do business with as you're the organization I trust with my data, right? And in that case, either I trust you or not. Like, are you going to do the right thing or not? And so I remember so I went to an online college, believe it or not. I went to an audiovisual college. And one of my professors, he asked us the question of saying, how do you make sure that when you enter a credit card in a e-commerce store, that no one will reuse that credit card again?
Right. Yeah.
And the answer to that is don't save it.
Yeah, right. Data that does not exist cannot be stolen. That's a pretty good truism. Yes. All right. Well, I think I'm happy to end on a note where spreadsheets are bad and trust is good. These are philosophies that I think everybody can move forward with.
Awesome.
All right. I want to thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
That's our show. Now, before we go, I do want to give a shout out to an organization that Svatka has gotten involved with, thanks in part to Mr. Alex Sutherland himself, PhillyForce. And PhillyForce is having their dreaming event, Mid-Atlantic Dreaming, in October. So keep an eye out for that and fingers crossed that they're going to be able to keep that stage. Thanks for listening. My huge thanks to Svatka for the great conversation and information. If you want to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes and have links to the favorite podcast service of your choice. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.